When I first started this podcast, I thought I was documenting my sabbatical. A pause, a break between chapters. But somewhere along the way, I realized it wasn't about taking time off. It was about learning how to redesign my life, my career reinvention. Welcome to the Knowing Moments. I'm your host, Joy Chick. And if you're new here, please subscribe and follow us. This is a space where we explore the quiet inflection points in life and career, the moments when something shifts internally before clarity and change follow. Over the last 9 episodes, we've been through a journey together, and it all started during my sabbatical. The shock of slowing down, the space between comfort and the growth, and finally, designing what comes next. That led me to becoming a beginner again. I went back to the last time that I was out of my depths, and then learning to swim. But eventually, to more recent times that when success has become a birdcage. And in my new chapter, I find myself rebuilding my identity and finding where I belong. And through all of it, one question kept popping up. What does it actually take to redesign your life after decades of momentum? And today's episode, our season 1 finale, is called Designing a Career Beyond the Title. As I've stepped into this new chapter, 3 experiences has taught me more than anything else about what redesigning a career actually looks like. When I first started this multi-hyphenate career, I honestly thought I had an advantage. After years operating at Microsoft, I believed I had become exceptionally good at context switching. Back-to-back meetings that could go from engineering architecture, customers, strategy, talent management, all probably happened before lunchtime. And for years, that was my normal operating mode. So when this next chapter began, balancing public company board work, venture capital costs, and building the knowing moments, I just assumed that I could manage this transition very easily. Gosh, I was wrong. At first, I even tried to structure it perfectly. Podcast work on certain days, board and venture calls on others. Super well organized, very intentional. And of course, just like all good plans, it fell apart almost immediately. Because venture calls don't magically land on Thursdays, and board discussions move constantly. Interesting founders appear unexpectedly, and creative work certainly doesn't follow calendar blocks. But the biggest surprise wasn't necessarily scheduling. It was my identity. For almost 3 decades, I knew exactly how to operate inside the Microsoft ecosystem. I knew the language, the rhythms, the expectations. But now, I was trying to answer a very different question. Who is Joy outside that system? And honestly, I'm still not entirely sure yet. One day that captured this perfectly. I was sitting in a coffee shop working on podcast script and writing about uncertainty, fear, transition, and trying to find the right words. And then suddenly, my phone rang. A venture capital call came in. Within seconds, I had mentally shifted. Now, we were discussing founder evaluation, market category, business models, and 45 minutes later, I finally hung up. So I opened my podcast script again. but emotionally, I was completely gone. I remember sitting there thinking, these worlds really require completely different versions of me. One rewarded the decisiveness and speed, and the other required reflection and stillness. And some days, I wasn't sure how to move gracefully between them. Because creativity doesn't respond to pressure the way that executive work does. It requires space. And I was still learning how to protect that intentionally. For years, my public voice has been connected to Microsoft. My LinkedIn posts were all about product launches, customers, conferences. And now that framework is gone. And for the first time in decades, I felt both isolation and freedom. Freedom to speak in my own voice, to explore ideas that matters to me personally, and to be more vulnerable. I remember staring at one of my very first LinkedIn posts after announcement. I hesitated to hit that post button, not because the topic was controversial, but because there was no institution behind me anymore. And underneath that was a fear that I think many leaders secretly carry. What if people stop listening when the title disappears? What if the platform belonged to the role, not to me? But then a friend sent me a note, and he said, "It's really nice hearing your voice again. I'm enjoying the non-corporate side of joy showing up these days on LinkedIn." And suddenly I realized people weren't only connected with the title. They were connecting with the human behind it. And maybe reinvention isn't about abandoning what you have built. Maybe it's about learning how to bring more of yourself into this chapter. One of the ways I decided to test the idea of building something from scratch was by building this podcast. And when I started the Knowing Moments, I didn't think of it as a hobby. I thought of it as a beginning of a future product. I wanted to learn how to create something from zero, using AI as my collaborator, and combining the storytelling, creativity, technology, and the entrepreneurship into one project. And of course, I completely underestimated just how much work it would take. At the beginning, I was doing everything. And a part of me felt oddly proud of that. Like, look at this. I can do the whole thing by myself. So very first time entrepreneur optimism. But then reality arrived quickly. Just the sheer magnitude of things I had to learn. Suddenly, I really realized that building something from scratch means nobody else is coming to do the work for you. At Microsoft, there are teams supporting every aspect of execution. And here, it was just me. And that was very humbling at first. I talked about the podcast cover art in my previous episode. I had originally created something AI generated. It's functional, good enough. And then one of my fiance's best friends, who teaches art, decided that this was just not acceptable and quickly volunteered to help. A few weeks later, as I was sitting in a New York hotel room after walking felt like 20,000 steps around Manhattan, I was exhausted, aching all over. And when I saw the email from him, inside were these beautiful concepts he created. Icebergs, adventure, movements, and yes, penguins. I immediately called him. Whoa, these penguins are amazing. And for a brief period, we seriously considered a version of our cover art with penguins jumping off icebergs. which we quickly realized that may not be a good idea. And eventually, we chose the more elegant, the page-turning graphic. Without realizing it, and just little by little, a team of friends was forming around this little project. Then came marketing, my least favorite part. I love creating, writing, storytelling, reflecting. But digital media campaigns, content funnels, not exactly my natural habitat. One evening, a close friend who leads marketing came over. We sat outside by the fire pit, and I finally admitted to her, I think I'm completely clueless about digital marketing. And she just laughed. Well, Joy, welcome to being the founder and the CEO of a startup. You have to do every part of the job. And then she smiled. And that's also why you have friends. I'm here to help. And what followed was a spontaneous strategy session that lasted late into the evening. What I remember most wasn't about the specific advice. It was the realization that my tribe had always been around me, showing up. And then maybe that's what building something meaningful actually looks like. Not a lone genius, but a group of friends who believe in an idea before anyone knows what might become possible. A few weeks ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table on a quiet Sunday afternoon, working on this episode. Coffee besides me, my laptop was open, and I found myself asking a very simple question. What is my life now? So I opened my calendar and I scanned the next few weeks. Board meetings, founder conversations, VC introductions, podcast recording sessions, walking with friends, dinner plans. Of course, I blocked out blocks for workout. I noticed it was both different and the same as my old calendar. It's still very busy. There's still lots of context switching. But the content looks completely different from the life I had lived for almost 3 decades. All because of the biggest and the fundamental change. No one designed this week for me. I did. For most of my career, my life was shaped by the momentum of the institution around me. And over time, that rhythm became inherited. And the inherited rhythms eventually start feeling like choices. Now, for the first time in a very long time, I get to decide what deserves my energy, what conversations matter, and what kind of work feels meaningful. One afternoon, I met a very good friend for coffee, another senior Microsoft leader in a similar phase. We sat together and immediately started talking, reconnecting, life transitions, career reinvention, old memories, and new ideas. And 2 hours disappeared. I had never even ordered a coffee. Eventually, she glanced at her watch and panicked. Oh no, I have to get home and make dinner for my kids. And we both laughed and headed out. And as I stood there saying goodbye, I felt energized, but also calm. I wasn't mentally rushing towards the next meeting, and I hadn't checked my email once. I was completely present. I could physically feel the difference. I didn't realize how long it had been since I felt that way. Because for decades, I was constantly moving from one thing to the next. And now, for the first time in a very long time, I felt not less ambitious, not less driven, just more free. One morning, after I confessed to my trainer that I had fallen asleep on the couch again at 7 p.m. from exhaustion, he laughed and said, You're still busy, maybe even busier than ever. And then he said, but something feels different. You seem lighter, more free. Because I think he was noticing something that I only begin to understand myself. There's a difference between living by external momentum and living by design. As I reflect on this first few months away from Microsoft, I thought the hardest part would be leaving the title, losing the platform. But surprisingly, none of those turned out to be the hardest part. What surprised me the most was realizing just how much of my life had been inherited. My identity, my community, my schedule, and even my definition of success. And then suddenly, all of that disappeared. No annual goals, no organizational scorecard. And for the first time, I had to ask myself, what does success look like now? And I thought I would have an answer immediately, but I didn't. And in fact, I still don't have a complete answer. Because success in this chapter feels very different. Some days, it looks like helping a founder think through a difficult decision. Some days, it looks like a meaningful board discussion. Some days, it looks like a listener sent me a note saying that my podcast helped him navigate a transition in his own life. And some days, it looks like having coffee with a friend and being completely present in the moment. The old scorecard was easier. The new one is more personal. And maybe that's what has been both the most surprising and the most challenging part of the transition. Learning that success isn't something I can inherit anymore. I have to define it for myself. And the same is true for fulfillment. For most of my career, it came from building, leading teams, solve hard problems, and those things still matter. But now, I'm discovering that other sources of fulfillment too. Creating, learning, coaching, building relationships. And maybe the biggest lesson of this year is designing a career isn't just about deciding what you want to do. It's about deciding what matters, recalibrating what success and fulfillment looks like, and having the courage to build your career around it. As I reflect on this first season of the many stories and the lessons, here are the 4 that really stood out. Lesson 1. Busyness hides important questions. When life moves fast enough, you don't notice what's changing inside you. The signals are there, but momentum drowns them out. Lesson 2. Success can become a birdcage. Success rewards continuation. It rarely rewards reinvention. And the hardest thing to question is what's working. And lesson 3. Identity must evolve. Your title is not your identity. It is a platform you operate from. And then when you separate the two, you gain freedom. And last, a meaningful career must be intentionally designed. Growth requires becoming a beginner again, no matter how experienced you are. Success, belonging, impact, fulfillment, they can be inherited. They must be intentionally built. Many of you listening are not taking a sabbatical, and you may not be leaving your company. You may not be launching a podcast. But at some point, everyone encounters a knowing moment, a quiet signal, a question that keeps returning, and a feeling that something inside is evolving. And eventually, you can no longer ignore it. So I will leave you with 3 questions. Where in your life are you moving on momentum rather than intention? What part of you might be ready for reinvention? And what chapter might be quietly near completion? Because redesigning a career isn't about abandoning everything that came before. It is about choosing what comes next with intention. This first season has been my story. And next season, in addition to my continued journey, I'd also like to explore those knowing moments through conversations with other leaders, founders, builders, and people from different walks of life navigating their own inflection points. Because none of us go through these transitions alone. The biggest change in our lives rarely arrive all at once. They unfold through a series of quiet moments, and when you know, you know. This is the Knowing Moments. I'm Joy Chick. Thank you for being here. Season 2 will start in September, and during the summer, I will experiment with a few fun and reflection episodes, so stay tuned. If this episode resonates with you, please subscribe, rate, and review the Knowing Moments wherever you get your podcasts, and sign up for updates at theknowingmoments.com/email. And if someone came to mind while listening, please share this podcast with them. You can share and tag us on your social posts. We are the Knowing Moments on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And send your feedback and suggestion for future episodes to joy@theknowingmoments.com as we continue this journey together.